One of the true masters of British rock and roll, Steve Winwood scored his first #1 as a teenage prodigy with the Spencer Davis Group.
To see him singing the way he sang there seemed to me to be impossible. I was stunned.
It's wonderful. This guy sounds black. Everything I wanted and wasn't achieving.
By the time he was 20, Winwood turned his back on pop fame and formed Traffic, who famously got it together in the country.
I think living together, there's no substitute for that. You'll grow together as a musical group.
When Steve stepped into Traffic, they took it to a new level, mind-expanding kind of lyrics, you know, and it was a great experience.
Traffic defined the 70s rock album.
And I love that thing with Traffic, mixing all these different types of music. There was kind of jazz, there was folk, there was rock, and there was soul and R&B. Very, very English sounding, I think.
In the 80s, Winwood became a chart-topping superstar, more successful than ever.
Jumped into the 80s majors mark as a new pop star, recreating himself.
And now in his 60s, Winwood's come full circle, doing what he does best, playing and singing his heart out.
Every nation, but at times we do forget about them. I loved the sound of the organ and the harmonies and the timbres of the pipes. When I used to sneak a few plays at St John's Perry Bar when I was a choir boy, I think somehow that sort of got ingrained. I like to try and include elements like a plain song and older church melodies to make some English soul music, whether it's Brit rock or ancient choral music. I was born in Birmingham, in Handsworth. My mother and father then moved right out to a suburb of Birmingham called King's Standing, which was really in Warwickshire at the time. It was right on the edge of the expansion of the 30s housing developments. At the back of where I lived were fields, farms, duck ponds and, woods. We just were told to go outside and play, and we would explore wonderful old farms and fields and quarries and all sorts of things. Yeah, we used to have a good time. My father was a semi-professional musician. He left school about 14. He was mainly a saxophone and clarinet player. And then he worked in the big, heavy industry foundries, and then worked as a musician as well. And there were always instruments in the house, so it was a very natural thing that I would be expected that I should be able to carry a bit of a tune.
I was really motivated by my tiny brother, who I could immediately see had some fantastic musical intuition. So I thought, I've got to get going here because I've got to keep up with him. And so I got involved in playing the guitar.
And then, of course, the minute he got a guitar, I decided I wanted a guitar as well, like most little brothers say, well, if he's got one, I want one as well.
Steve had never touched my guitar before, and all of a sudden he said, hang on a minute, why don't you try it like this? And he picked up my guitar and he just did it. And in no time at all, he'd overtaken me by miles.
The Winwood brothers often joined their father Lawrence's dance band and were given a showcase.
As
as the 50s came in and young people would come, my dad used to get us along to play the rock.
Steve would play all the Dwayne Eddy kind of things, and I'd back him up. And of course, they'd go down an absolute storm because this tiny little chap would stand up in this dance hall and play this great new rock and roll.
When my brother was about 16 or 17, he had a band with friends at school that played this kind of Dixieland, New Orleans jazz. I'd begged them to let me play with them. And of course, 16, 17-year-olds didn't really want an 11-year-old hanging around with them. But they let me play. And then I think probably when I played, they thought, well, he's not bad.
Georgia, oh Georgia.
Just about when Steve's voice was breaking, somebody somewhere played a Ray Charles record. And that was the key for Steve, just at the moment when his voice changed.
Keeps Georgia on my mind.
He became my model. The minute I heard that, I wanted to try and sing as much like Ray Charles as I could.
I said, Georgia, no, no. Georgia, yeah. A song of love comes out sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine.
The thing that always sticks about Steve is seeing him do Georgia on My Mind. To see him singing the way he sang then seemed to me to be impossible with the amount of experience he would have had as a human being, And so I was stunned. This young white boy playing that with all the power that Ray Charles would bring to it was awe-inspiring.
So now I had a little brother who could play the guitar better than any of us, he could play the piano better than any of us, and now we had to bring him out the front because he could sing better than any of us. So he became quite useful, really.
The vibrant Birmingham music scene was made up of young bands hooked on American rhythm and blues and soul music, all wanting to escape what life otherwise had in store for them.
Birmingham was a very different place back then. It was a very industrial city, and we were pretty tough people. You were factory fodder, And the amazing load of bands came out of that. It was a way out of getting into a factory. I was making £15 a week. That was twice as much as my dad made in the factory.
I'm sitting there thinking, got nothing, baby, on my mind.
We were probably playing somewhere near the Birmingham University, and Spencer Davis was in the audience. He was 10 years older than Steve and 5 years older than me, so he was a real bloke, he'd been there and done it all, and he sat in and played with us.
Just one, no, babe, one good reason. You treat your daddy so unkind.
When we played together, we identified something in each other that would make the music that we were playing just that much more rich, a more urban Chicago type of blues.
Oh, baby, baby, why don't you do that thing to me?
Spencer was the main singer, really, and Steve was the lead guitarist. And Spencer knew a very good drummer, Pete York, so I switched to bass. And then, as we realised how good Steve was with his singing, he more and more took over as being the singer.
I went to see him at the place called The Whiskey in Birmingham. It was a blues club, which they did quite regularly then. I think he was 15 and was blown away.
I love the way she walks. I love the way she
We'd all heard about him. There was this white kid, he sounded black, and he played like black. And he was a white kid from Birmingham. I mean, where did that come from? Something magical about him.
The first time I got to see him live, having heard about him, was at the Twisted Wheel in Manchester. And I made a bookmark in my head that one day I would love to play with him, you know.
But Steve was still at school.
Things weren't really going too well then with my school work. And obviously people at school, teachers, headmaster would read reviews and see where I was playing. And then teachers suggested to me that it'd probably be just as well if I didn't come to school. From then on I was a professional musician.
In 1964, Chris Blackwell, future founder of Island Records, Steve's label for the next 25 years, became the group's manager and got them a record deal.
I hadn't heard the Spencer Davis Group before. What a great band. And that kid, he is amazing.
You got dimples in your jaw. You got dimples in your jaw. You got dimples in your jaw. You my babe, I got my eyes on you.
I was staggered by his performance, his voice and his playing and everything, but particularly his voice, because at that young age, I mean, I just thought, oh dear, when he does get to London, it's all over for a whole bunch of us.
Oh, love to see you switch. You my babe, I got my...
This was mainly blues, but then I very quickly realised that I had to bring something else into the music Spencer Davis Group were playing. We attempted to do that with Keep On Running.
They made great sounds. They had a great bass player, actually, Muff Winwood.
When we had our number one with Keep On Running, Steve was a real pop star.
The older blues fans were kind of muscled out by a new wave of teenage girls screaming, and Steve had this particular furry jacket on that he liked to wear. And to our horror, the girls in the audience all leapt on stage and started ripping chunks of the fur out of his coat. I don't think he was too impressed by being a teeny bop idol.
Keep On Running, a song written by Jamaican singer Jackie Edwards, knocked the Beatles' Day Tripper off the number one spot in January 1966. Steve was just 17 years old.
When we had our hit with Keep On Running, there was money to be spent on other things. And so Steve bought his first Hammond organ. And now, all of a sudden, he could be Ray Charles.
You have to, that's everything turning over, and it's not actually switched on yet. And then you switch it on, and then you let go of that, and it should now be working. So we'll go and see if it is.
He then started to use the Hammond organ in spots with the Spencer Davis Group, and we can have a far more interesting sound. That kind of jazzier feel of things was coming through into our kind of R&B.
Well, my temperature's rising and my feet off the floor. Pretty people knocking 'cause they want some more. Let me in, babe. Don't know what you got, but you
had 2 or 3 number 1 hit singles, and like you do, you get offers to do bits in movies and stuff.
I gave you my heart right from the start, yeah. I gave you my heart, now you tear it apart.
Nicholas Parsons was one of the was one of the great actors in that. He was fantastic. He was great fun, and I think he played our manager.
Come on then, to the boat! Come on, to the boat! Oh, hell! Ah! Hey, listen to the boat! Oh, my hey, come on, to the boats! Good manager group.
He's charming as he could be when we made the film, but we shouldn't really have been making that film.
I'll give you...
I take a rather cynical view of it, and I think it's rather typical of the way music gets driven into some kind of commercial, popular way in order to generate revenue. And I mean, to be honest, I've suffered a bit from that for the whole of my career, going along with things like that, where had I been more on the ball, I would have not done it, you know.
If anything was going to cause the breakup of the Spencer Davis Group, which we were beginning to talk about, this movie was the final nail in the coffin.
There was that danger with Steve that maybe he peaked at the age of 18 and nothing much more was going to happen.
Spencer Davis Group had just gone up a notch, just had 2 big hits in America with Give Me Some Lovin', I'm a Man, and then leaving. If you viewed it as a career with a revenue stream, you'd view it as some kind of ridiculous move. But if you look at the music, it's an obvious move.
Well, let's face it, folks. It had to end somewhere. 1, 2, 8, 2, take 1, the end.
Do yourself a favor, wake up to your mind.
1966 saw huge changes in the music scene, with many bands breaking free from the tyranny of the pop charts to assert their creative independence. The cream of the emerging British rock and roll elite hung out together and jammed in late-night London clubs like the Speakeasy and the Bag o' Nails. Steve had recently moved to London.
When I moved down to London, Eric was living in a flat in Soho and had this group of friends with him, and they used to listen to stuff and introduced me, brought me into his fold.
I remember having conversations with Steve about getting together one day, and I think at the point where I was ready to leave John Mayall, he, at that time, was forming Traffic.
Steve formed Traffic with 3 friends he'd bonded with over jam sessions at an after-hours club back in Birmingham. Flute and sax player Chris Wood, drummer Jim Capaldi, and guitarist and sitar player Dave Mason.
Traffic was really about playing with his mates. I remember him telling me about the philosophy behind that, which was music being made in a very unskilled way. It was important that the music be made from feeling, not necessarily from technique.
Traffic's 1967 debut single, Paper Sun, was a top 5 hit. For all its psychedelic dreaminess, the song still conformed to pop's 3-minute format. But this, and much else besides, was about to change.
There was a definite change in Steve the moment that Traffic began. He really became a member of the sort of 60s flower hippie generation.
We felt that music was part of our lives, and that was what we wanted to do, to the exclusion of everything else. It's more important that we lived together and made the music.
Traffic decided to live and work as a collective. The band moved to a remote cottage in Berkshire, isolating themselves from the scene and the music business, to get it together in the country.
I've never been back here since I left in 1969. And these trees have grown up. I don't think they were even planted. Goodness me, it looks very tidy and fancy compared to what it used to be.
There was nothing there. It was just rolling down as far as you could see. And there's one brick house sitting out in the middle of nowhere.
You know, we just ate when we wanted to eat. We woke up when we wanted to wake up, and we played when we wanted to play.
We built a big concrete stage out in the front of it. And in summer, we just set up out there, you know, stacks of Marshalls and shit and PAs. Blast.
It was derelict and it was empty, so we painted it. It was just mattresses on the floor, really. Probably would say it was a bit squalid, yes.
But I love the idea of that at a certain age, that just four guys just get together and all they do day and night is just play music. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Get stoned and play music. What else could be better, really?
I'm looking for a girl who has no face. She has no name or number.
There was many times when all they did all day was smoke dope, and that gave them a much different attitude.
I used to smoke weed, and I probably smoked too much weed. In and out of a dope haze, I would say. Times out of it, out of a dope haze, and times in a dope haze. Yes, probably drifting in and out.
They said you must come down, you know, and now I'm a city boy, you know, and it was quite a revelation. And there it was. It's just fantastic, just heaven, middle of nowhere, freedom. It was just a magical time. There was beautiful summers then as well. I don't know if it was acid or if they were. The sun was out a lot, you know.
There's an awakening. That's really what it was. But we were all very young. We were all very naive, I suppose, and inexperienced. But it nevertheless was. I wish it was still like that. I really mean that.
Making music is really the memories that I have of that, I suppose. We somehow felt that there was something in the landscape that had some meaning to our music and that it contributed something. And so after we would explore these landscapes, we'd then go back and immediately play and find that in some way this was affecting us and affecting our minds and affecting the music we were playing. Chris was at art college, and I think he was also at the Royal Academy, so he was a very good artist, but he was passionate about music.
He wanted to transfer from art to painting in music.
He used to study maps and charts and watch birds. He brought to us music that we'd never heard before, from Japanese classical music to obscure jazz, Yorkshire folk songs, to actually help us to define the music we were making. In a way, he was the kind of spiritual leader.
along with that went recreational drug taking.
Looks in the gutter for something to smoke.
We really had the notion that we could change the world by what we did and what we thought and how we did it. And one of the things was to be open, and one of the things was to be friendly to other people. You know, we all felt that it was good to give other people a good time. You know, dear Mr. Fantasy, sing me a song. Make everybody happy.
As part of Traffic's very free collaborative methods, Jim Capaldi, the group's drummer, wrote many of the band's lyrics.
Jim was half gypsy, half pirate from Worcestershire, from an Italian family. Jim would jot a few words down on paper. We would go and play, jam, and I would stand these bits of paper up on top of the organ or in front of the guitar, and then whenever it felt that it was right, I would sing what was written down on the piece of paper. He did a little sketch next to the words he wrote, so we used that sketch for a character on the front of the album.
Take us out of this gloom. Sing a song, play guitar, make it snappy.
These were my very good friends that I lived here with, you know, and they're all gone, you know. So it's, of course, it's you know, sort of bittersweet, you know, return to remembering all these good times with friends who are no longer with us, you know. More bittersweet than I imagine it would be. We kind of deliberately wanted to remove ourselves from anything that was pop. We really didn't want to be making pop music.
But not everyone in the band believed as wholeheartedly as Steve in Traffic's organic and collaborative method of songwriting.
And I come up with this goofy song called Hole in My Shoe.
Hole in My Shoe, Traffic's second single, reached number 3. In Europe at least, it remains perhaps their best-known tune.
Now suddenly I'm writing the hit record and I'm singing it. And now this is Traffic's big first hit, big hit.
But the other members of the group were far less enthusiastic.
I hated it. And for me it was like, well, I understand it's not exactly the kind of songs I want to keep writing either. It's just my first attempts, guys.
He was off on another road to us, which is fine, but
the fact remained it wasn't the same route that we were going.
It just became those three and me.
He wanted to write completely alone and get us as a band to play his composition. So we wrestled with that and then really kicked Dave out of the band because it was completely opposite to what Traffic had ever wanted to do.
Seems I've got to have a change of scene.
Nonetheless, Dave returned for Traffic's self-titled second album.
He came in sort of as a guest to play a few songs, but he was never really joined the group.
No, Dave Mason, he was nothing more than an invited guest. I mean, that's how he captured me. Made the album, you know, what are we going to put out for a single? Well, we're going to put Feeling Alright out as a single.
You're feeling alright. I'm not feeling too good myself.
Now my songs were being picked as the singles again. I guess that created some animosity somewhere. The only thing I could think of was jealousy. But why? The guy is so enormously talented, it's ridiculous. There was a band meeting, and, okay, what's going on, guys? Well, basically, man, we don't like the way you sing or play or write or do anything. We just want you out of the band. And that's how it ended.
Now a trio, in 1968, Traffic embarked on their first US tour.
We were three English lads from the rural Worcestershire, just landing in San Francisco, and were met by the Grateful Dead off the plane.
I vaguely remember going to the airport, picking the guys up, bringing them back to our place in the city. You know, it was just sort of a welcome gesture. You know, here, have a little LSD and let's wig out a little bit. And they were game, which we pretty much figured they would be.
See that girl barefoot in the lawn, whistling and singing, she's a carry-on.
The Grateful Dead were spearheading the San Francisco acid underground. They also lived and played together, though in their case at 710 Ashbury, in the heart of the flowering Haight-Ashbury scene.
It takes commitment to form a band like the Grateful Dead or like Traffic. I think living together, there's no substitute for that. They were an improvisational band like the Grateful Dead were. They were kindred spirits, very much so.
Traffic was heading into Sacred Dimension land. Traffic was playing from the heart and from the gut.
It was very inspirational to us as a band as well, because we were accepted as part of that scene, and because of the way the trio was set up, it was very easy to improvise. So we went on without really knowing what we were going to play.
There were so many doors you could go through musically in Traffic, so they left a lot to the imagination. That's what made it a great band. It was the same thing when Ginger and Eric came over, you know, when the Cream came over.
That particular bubble had burst with Cream, being based on virtuosity, didn't work because we all just ended up jamming on our own. And I thought again of Steve.
This time, Eric was successful in luring Steve away from Traffic.
It was felt by Jim and Chris that there was an element of disloyalty on my part, and they're probably right, but I thought that I should be free to make music in whatever way I wanted to. I felt that was a right that I should have. So leaving one band and going with another was just part of those freedoms at the time.
I thought we could meet somewhere in the middle of what he'd been trying to do with Traffic, with the unskilled labour mates kind of experiment, and the virtuosity experiment that we tried with Cream. If we started with the two of us, then we could put a band around that. While we were doing that one night, there was a knock at the door, and there was Ginger. You know, and he just sort of came in and made himself a cup of tea. I do remember feeling a sense of disappointment.
I thought Ginger was a great great player, but obviously he has a certain style.
God bless him. I love Ginger dearly, but he did represent something that I was trying to leave behind. You know?
The group was completed with bassist Rick Gretsch. Blind Faith, quite incredibly, gave their debut performance in front of 20,000 people at a free concert in London's Hyde Park.
It was a great idea. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon and thousands of people there.
Very easy to make things bigger and louder. It's much harder as the audiences get bigger to try and make your music smaller and draw the people in. It's much more tricky than the straight ahead rock blues, which a lot of the audiences who went to see us were actually looking for.
We were labelled as being the first supergroup. Someone came up with that. I thought the music flew on its merit. It didn't have anything to do with hype or personalities. And so I thought supergroup is the absolute opposite of that. It's all based on everybody's individual fame and achievement up until that point. And I thought, well, here we are again. This is the same. I'm in Cream, basically. And the problem then was we were rushed into a situation we weren't ready for, a big world tour. I'd probably emotionally started to quit the band anyway.
Come down off your throne and leave your body alone.
I saw him once. Very disappointing, yeah. For me, considering, who was up there. Blind Faith was a failure, in my estimation. It never became a band. It never got group mind. It never became more than the individuals.
We should have carried on. Steve and I needed more time.
Thank you.
The one regret I would have is what effect it would have had on Steve, because I think he invested a lot of himself into that project, much more than I did. And, there was a lot of pressure on him to be the front man, to be the writer. And I'm sad and ashamed to a certain extent that I walked away from it.
Picking himself up after Blind Faith, Steve delved deep into the soul of the English countryside.
There were three men came out of the west. Their fortunes for to try. And these three men made a solemn John Barleycorn must die.
I felt I still had a lot of music in me. I embarked on the beginnings of a solo record, but I still felt that what Traffic had began, trying to put together all these different musical elements, was still very important. And Jim Capaldi and Chris Wood were the people that could help me to do this. And it became the album John Barleycorn.
I love that thing with Traffic, mixing all these different types of music. There was kind of jazz, there was folk, there was rock, and there was soul and R&B, and kind of blending it all up. And I thought it was, it's a really amazing thing, really. Very, very English sounding, I think. You know, you've got that, but you've also got his fantastic bluesy voice on top of it, which is a great blender.
Of course, the title track of John Barleycorn was an English folk song, which was sometimes called the Passion of the Corn, and it's a parallel with the Passion of Christ and the rural cycle. The winter, the land being dormant, and then the corn growing, rising, being cut off, being ground between stones and being mistreated, eventually rising again in the form of alcohol or bread. And it was called historically the Passion of the Corn.
Through the early 1970s, Traffic made a series of LPs that put them at the heart of the newly dominant rock album culture.
Sometimes I feel so uninspired. Sometimes I feel like giving up.
With Traffic's success in America now eclipsing their popularity at home, the band embarked on another long US tour.
Sometimes I feel like I've had enough. Sometimes you feel like you've been hired. Sometimes you feel like you've been bought.
I was ill during the tour, but getting through it. But yeah, I kept visiting various doctors who said, I was just a bit run down or something like that. And no one could really diagnose it.
Eventually, he was so ill, he was sent back home from tour and went to bed that night, and his appendix blew.
Dr. Rowland, who still lives in the village here, he smiled slightly and said, what you've got is peritonitis. I think we'll call this man in Cheltenham and we'll get you down to the hospital straight away.
He was, like a skeleton, and there was wires all over him and machines all around him. I think that the time in hospital certainly made him reflect on what his life had been about and how he was going to move onwards.
I suppose it was growing up, really, albeit a bit late growing up, a late developer.
After the Traffic communal experiment had come to an end, Steve had moved to rural Gloucestershire.
I then thought, well, it's time for me to start experiencing more of the world outside of music. What you see here is pretty much all grassland, which is typical Cotswold country. We have cattle, sheep, and then we grow mainly wheat, barley, and oilseed rape. The countryside and rural events were very much part of my discovering the world outside of music. I was actually getting to know people who had no idea who Steve Winwood the musician was, which was in a way very refreshing.
I had never heard of Steve Winwood or Traffic. I'm not a rock lover as such. Well, he's matured, shall I say, into a country squire. He's got sort of two existences. Music, when he plays to all the masses and that, and a lovely retreat where he can walk his dogs.
Traffic had split up, and Steve's first solo LP sold disappointingly. The music world beyond Steve's estate was changing.
Punk rock was emerging, which was directed right at the likes of me. And of course, I didn't realise how cyclical music was going to be then. I was thinking this was the end, I've finished now.
He had already lived 2 lifetimes by the time I met him. I sussed a little bit of what, he was going through a transformation, leaving one thing and going to another, set a new direction. And I could feel that, We would go for long walks through the countryside, and then the words started writing themselves out of the landscape, you see.
There was a lot at stake. I was very aware that this was a bit of a make or break project with Will Jennings.
Stand up in a clear blue morning until you see what can be. Alone and a cold day dawning. This affirmation, while you see a chance, take it, because it's all on you. And everything lies before you. While you see a chance was a real departure. I could feel Steve just going into the future. It's a lot of rebirth in that song.
All but unrecognisable as the Steve Winwood of the 60s and 70s, While You See a Chance and the 1981 album Ark of a Diver both went top 10.
I was proud of Steve for doing that. I thought it was marvellous that he lifted himself out of that slough of despond of the late 70s when things did look a bit gloomy and were going downhill. So it was marvellous that he jumped into the 80s and made his mark as a new pop star. He was recreating himself.
Real change came about with Ark of a Diver because I played everything, wrote it, produced, engineered. I literally did everything on that record.
The whole grammar of music was changing in the 1980s. Steve's solo career was positioned to capture the emerging adult-orientated rock audience. To seal the deal, a top producer was brought in.
The one thing I did ask him to do, let's make this record in New York. To take Steve out of Gloucestershire and out of that comfortable country gentleman setting and plop him down the streets of New York. Because there's an energy that you get from the city.
To promote the chart-topping single Higher Love, Steve, now in his late 30s, took steps he'd never have contemplated in his laid-back youth, not least embracing the new MTV video culture.
I was surprised to see him dancing. He was wearing a suit and just singing and dancing. I thought that was a one-off.
There was very much an 80s production sound on it. As far as the music is concerned, I was still combining bits of world music with jazz and rock and folk. MTV to me was a sort of necessity of, the industry, so I was led to believe, and so I was constantly being told. So that was fine by me. Well, I mean, I went along with it, I should say. I don't know how fine it was, but I went along with it.
I remember, saying to him, you can't be a star unless you do these things. You've got to do the TV shows, you've got to do the interviews.
Hi, I'm Steve Winwood. I'm glad to be here on Top Pop, and I hope you like my new single, Night Train.
Steve Winwood of the 80s kind of fitted the 80s. I'm not sure it fitted him. To me, it looked uncomfortable because I knew that he would be struggling with it. But it was a very lucrative period for him.
Going top 10 on both sides of the Atlantic, the 1987 album Back in the High Life received no less than 3 Grammy Awards.
It's so hard to just slow down, so don't be surprised to see me back in the bright part of town. I'll be back in the high life again. All the doors I closed one time will open up again.
But while Steve had made his own luck in the 80s, another of his Traffic cohorts had not fared so well.
He always had a thing about Traffic and wanted it to be Traffic forever. So when Traffic actually did finish, it was quite a crushing blow to him, and something from which he didn't appear to recover.
In 1987, Chris Wood died of liver failure.
I was very close to Chris, and I was very affected by his death, and a very tragic loss and a great loss. And this kind of music has always had a tie-up with heavy drug taking, and it takes its toll.
Steve and Traffic drummer Jim Capaldi decided to go out on one last great Traffic jam.
Ready for the gig?
Yeah, we're ready.
See you later. Traffic began to gain meaning somehow as time went on. It seemed to be getting more valuable. It was obvious that, Jim Capaldi and I had this strong bond. Suddenly thought, just you and me are Traffic now. That's no longer Chris.
Chris was really, he was important in what he was as a person. He was pure artist.
Great reunion. Bit kind of nostalgic, and you can never get back 1967. They were slick in 1994, and in 1967 they were kind of Traffic.
Traffic's enduring legacy was underlined in 2004, when the band were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Even original member Dave Mason was invited. A few months later, Jim Capaldi succumbed to stomach cancer.
Very glad to have had that last fling of Traffic. And it was great that it happened before Jim's untimely death. It was very fitting.
Since that last great jam, Steve's music has increasingly recaptured the organic feel of Traffic's creative methods.
Well, I made a decision to create a different kind of a band, a kind of band I'd never really had before. It was based really on a kind of 60s organ trio, but then we added percussion and a horn player. And the 2 albums we've made have been based on the live music that we've played together. It's been very, very fulfilling time.
But one big question mark has remained in Steve's career. Last left hanging 30 years ago.
It felt like we had never really resolved what we started. It just was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting all down the years until now. And me pulling out of Blind Faith was an act of infidelity in a way. And over the years, we've repaired that and we've become very good pals.
Joining forces for a series of concerts, Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood's career-long attempts to form a partnership have finally found a home.
The decision was made very early on. It wasn't going to be a blind faith reunion. Eric now is a great singer and a great band leader, and he never did any of that in blind faith.
It still feels like it's fresh. He's very creative, and he's great to be around. He's great to play with.
Oh, it was great to see Clapton and Winwood. These, it's the dream team, Steve was shining bright, and I was so proud of him. It was glorious. Eric had to, he had to keep up. No kidding.
It sums up all that they wanted to do all those years, and everything sort of floated away, all the problems, all the personalities, all the things that interfere with music making. It's a wonderful, heartwarming thing to see, I think, and it's made it all worthwhile.
There are very few of us left who were weaned in the same way, that grew up making our bones in the clubs 7 days a week, learning how to play the hard way. You have to be a musician in a way to understand how important he is. When people look back at what's gone on over the last, 50, 60 years, the people that will stand out will be people like Steve.
It wasn't that we looked up to him, but we admired him a lot for being something special. Oh, he hasn't changed at all. No, he's just the same Steve. A bit older, a bit wiser, as we all are. But we're still here, and that's the main thing.
There's no outside pressure anymore, except paying the bills, I suppose, on how he runs his career anymore. There might be a 6-month period where he's doing nothing. And I phone him, and where is he? In the studio. He's always playing.
I am semi-retired in as much as I've got the luxury of being able to pick and choose a bit what I do. But in terms of where I want to go musically, that I think is an ongoing quest, and it's something that will never really be resolved. Headless Horseman music. That's what Traffic used to call its sound.
Well, I turned around and 40,000 headmen did the firing 20 shotguns each and a man really hurt. But luckily for me, they had to stop and then reload. And by the time they done that, heading down the road. Heading down the road.